In this tutorial, we're going to look at lots of different ways that we can create models from the vectors that we created in a previous session. We're going to look at assembling the part to create a full 48-inch length moulding, and then look at how we can take that a stage further by distorting it along shapes to create this arch that you can see here. So I'm just going to go to File, Close. So we'll go and open an existing file. And from the project folder, we're going to select Lily Leaf Vector and open that. And you'll remember these are the vectors that we created in a previous session. So before we start modelling anything, let's just tile our windows horizontally. That way we can see our 2D view at the top, and any components that we create from these vectors will be visible in the 3D view at the bottom. So let's go to the Modelling tab. And the first component I'd like to create is the basic moulding shape. Now you'll remember when we created the vectors, we did so in a way that we're going to apply the 2-rail sweep in order for us to model that basic moulding. So we're going to use this vector here and this vector here, and they're going to represent our drive rails. And with this vector here, this is going to represent our cross section, and this is the shape that's going to sweep between those 2 rails. So before I do that, I'm just going to rename level 1 just to help me keep my components organised. I'm just going to rename that level by right mouse clicking on there, and I'm going to call that base. So then I can go into the 2-rail sweep form and select my rails. So I'm going to select my first one, hold down Shift, select the second one, then we're going to say Use Selection, and we can see now that those vectors have been transformed into drive rails. They're both pointing in the same direction, so all I need to do now is select my cross section, which is this vector here. I'm going to uncheck Scale to an exact height, and I'm going to call this component Basic Moulding, and then just apply that. Okay, so we can see that shape there. So if we take a look at the side, we can see the shape of this cross section here sweeping through those 2 rails. So I'm happy with that. Let's just close that, put that back in Z, and then I'm going to minimize this level and then just switch that off, as I'm ready to create a new level which will contain the leaf and the stem. So let's right mouse click over the base level, and I'm just going to insert a new level. I'm going to rename that level and call that level Leaf and Stem. So we're going to create the leaf shape first. So I'm going to select this vector and we're going to go over and create shape from vectors. So for this leaf, I'm going to give that a rounded profile. We're going to give that an angle of 65 degrees, and then I'm going to scale that to an exact height of 0.15. So what that will do, it will scale the highest part of that to exactly 0.15. I'm going to set that to merge. Then I'm going to call this one Leaf 1 and press Apply. And then what I'd like to do now is create a component to form this inner part of our leaf here. So staying in the Create Shape form, I can just use this option here to start a new component and then go and select my new vector. And then for the profile for this, we want to stick with a rounded profile. We're just going to reduce the angle of that to around 50 degrees, and then we're going to scale that to 0.1, and then we'll call that one Inner Leaf, press Apply. Okay, so I can't see anything there, that's because it's set to merge. What I'd like to do is set that to subtract, so it's sat inside of the component we created earlier. So we'll set that to subtract, we can see that there. Okay, so we'll just apply that, then I'm just going to go and start a new component. We'll select this vector here, and then we'll go back up to 65 degrees, rounded profile, and we're going to scale that to 0.15, set that to merge, and we're going to call that one Leaf 2. So we'll press Apply and close. And so I'm fairly satisfied with the overall shape of that leaf. So now we can start to think about modelling the stem component. Now when we created our vectors, we did so in a way that would look at modelling the stem using the extrude tool, which is this icon over here. So this is where we can extrude a shape using one or more centerline vectors. works the same principle as the two rail sweep, except we're just using one rail. So let's see how that works. So with that selected, I can go in to the extruder shape using one or more centerline vectors. Now, as we already have our vector selected, I'm just going to say use selection, and that's now transformed that vector into a drive rail. So if we work our way down the form, we can see the next section is asking us to select a cross section. Now we can either use vector cross sections or we could use a component. In this example, we're just looking at the vector cross sections. You'll remember we created two cross sections over here. If I just zoom in, we have a larger cross section and a smaller cross section. And the idea of that is to have the larger cross section coming in at the start point, and then it gradually getting smaller to the point where it forms the smaller cross section at the end point there. So I'm going to select the larger cross section, apply that to this point here. We can see that there's a tick next to my cursor that's telling me that's okay to apply that there. And then I'm going to select the smaller cross section and apply that to the end point over here. So let's just apply that to see how that looks. Okay, so that's not too bad. However, what I would like to do is maybe alter the shape of the vector just so it feeds in a little better, it's a bit more rounded at the bottom here. I don't need to come out of this form to change that, I can stay in this form. All I need to do is click into the white space, press N on the keyboard to go into node edit mode. I'm going to select the vector, and we can see now that we can look at altering those nodes and the control handles to change the shape of this vector. I'm just going to pull this down a little, maybe pull on the control handles, maybe just round this off a little bit. We'll just zoom in there. Take a look at that. Okay, so if I press F just to fit that to screen and then apply that, see how that looks. Okay, so I think that's a lot better than before. It was just a subtle change, but I think it's made a better difference on the overall look. Another thing that I'd like to alter is the cross sections, as I feel that it's coming in too thin too quickly. So in order for me to maintain the shape of this cross section here, what I'm going to do is insert that again but at a different point. So I'm going to select the larger cross section and then put that in position here, and then let's just apply that. We can see that shape's being maintained a bit longer, and then it's going to gradually get smaller into that small cross section at the end there. Okay, so we'll just set that to merge and then just take a look in the 3D view, see how that looks. It's not too bad. However, we can see the end point here, I think it's coming out a little too far, so we'll just go into the 2D view, and we're still in the node edit mode, so I'm just going to bring that down a little, apply that. We can see that that's sitting within that leaf shape nicely there. So I'll put that back in Z, then we'll go into the 2D view and press F to fit that to screen. And then what we could do now is look at maybe setting an exact height for this. So I'm going to select scale to an exact height, and then we're going to put in a value of 0.15. So let's apply that. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Let's call that component stem, press apply, and then we'll close the form down. And then what I'd like to do now is take all of those components that we can see here and create a smaller copy that's going to sit within our white space here. So in the component tree, I'm going to select stem, hold down shift to select leaf 1. Now they're all selected. I'm going to select any one of those components, and that's going to put all of those into transform mode. And then when I hold down control on the keyboard, that's going to allow me to create a copy, and whilst holding shift down also, that means that when I scale this down, it's going to scale that in proportion. Okay, so we've got control and shift held down to create my copy and to scale that in proportion. Okay, then I can just move that over and then look at rotating that round and hopefully position that in a nice place. Okay, it's not too bad. Just zoom in and bring that one up. And if we look at the 3D view, we can see that's coming right in there, so I'm happy with that. Then we'll just press F to fit that to screen, look at that down Z. And then ultimately what we want to do is create a mirrored copy of these two components on the other side. So I need to look at removing this smaller stem area here, as I don't need that. So I need to draw a vector in order for me to create a boundary that I'd like to crop the component to. So if we could just maximize the 2D view and then press F to fit that to screen, I'm going to go into the drawing tab. We're going to use draw a polyline. I'm just going to zoom in and I'm just going to roughly choose where I want to crop that. And then what I can do is just by pressing tab on the keyboard, that's going to join those vectors up for me. So I can close that, and then I'm just going to press page down to tile our windows. I'm going to select our component, shift and select the vector that I'd like to crop the component to. And then I can go into the modeling tab and say clear area of selected component inside selected vectors. Okay, so that's removed everything within that vector there. So I can select that vector now and delete that, and we can take a look at that in the 3D view, and I'm happy with how that's being blended into the main stem there. And so what I'd like to do now is look at mirroring all of those components onto the right hand side of our job space. Now before I do that, I'd just like to keep my component tree organised, so I'm going to look at grouping all of those components that we can see there. So I'm going to select the stem component, hold down shift, select the bottom leaf one, then I'm going to right mouse click and use the option to group. I'm just going to rename that group by right mouse clicking there, and I'm going to call that left leaf group. Okay, so I know that's on the left hand side, and then with that group selected, we're going to go over to mirror selected objects. What I'd like to do is flip that about the job centre. I'd also like to create a mirrored copy, and then we're going to flip that horizontally. Okay, so we can see that there. What I'd like to do now is flip the right hand side vertically, but I don't want to create a mirrored copy, so I'm just going to uncheck that, and then we're going to say flip vertical, and we can see that change taken place there. So if we close that, and then if we just rename that group, we'll just call that one right leaf group. And now we can see that we have a nice seamless transition running through the centre there, and that's with thanks to how we created the vector at the top here in the vector drawing session. So with that selected, if I just go into node edit mode, you'll remember that we made sure that the control handle was over to the right hand side of this vector so that we could create that nice seamless transition running through when we ultimately mirror the components like we just have done there. Okay, so let's just put that in normal selection mode, and then let's look at switching on our base level. And we can see that we're getting some strange results here in the 3D view, whereby we can see the creases of the basic moulding being transmitted through to our leaf and stem components. And the reason for that is because our leaf and stem level is currently set to add, so it's adding on top of our base level, which is sat below that. What we need to do is look at creating a smooth underlying shape that will ultimately crop to and merge with our base level so it can sit nicely on top without us being able to see these creases that are coming through here. So to do that, we're just going to create another vector. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to maximize the 2D view and just press F to fit that to screen. We're going to go into the drawing tab, we're going to draw a polyline. I'm just going to sketch around the basis of our cross section that we've already got here. So I'm just going to snap to this point here, and then snap to this point here, snap in position at the bottom, and then snap again. And I'm going to close that. Then I'm going to select that vector, I'm going to put that into node edit mode just to alter the shape of that vector so we can create a nice smooth underlined shape. So we're going to go into node edit, and I'm going to hover over this span, right mouse click and Bezier that span there. I'm just going to pull on this control handle and pull that right up so it's in line, and then the same for the bottom one here. I'm just going to zoom in, and then I'm going to select that handle, and then using the right arrow key I'm just going to pull that out. And I'm going to insert a point roughly around here by pressing I on the keyboard. And I'm just going to bring that right in. So we're trying to create a nice smooth shape over the top of our original cross section. Okay, and then we'll just pull that in again. Just trying to stay as close as possible to the original cross section. I'm going to zoom in and just maybe pull that in a little and check that there and pull that in also. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So let's just zoom to fit, and then we'll go and tile our windows. So we'll tile windows horizontally, and then we'll go back to our modeling tab. And so before we start to create a component using the two rail sweep, except we're going to use this new smooth underlying vector here, I just want to switch off my base level, and then I'm going to create a new level. So I'm going to right mouse click and say insert new level, and I'm just going to rename that level and call that smooth shape. Okay. And then with that selected, what I'm going to do is go and create a component from the visible model. So what we can see here, we're going to create a baked version of that. So I'm going to select that. It's going to be entered into the smooth shape level, as that's the active level. So now I can minimize my leaf and stem level and switch that off. So now let's create the two rail sweep in order for us to create that smooth underlying shape. So I'm going to go into the two rail sweep form. I'm going to select my first vector, shift and select the second one. So use selection to transform those into drive rails. And I'm going to select the smooth vector here, the cross section that we've just created. I'm going to call that smooth UL for underlying shape. Press apply and close. And so if we just take a look at that, we can see we've got that smooth cross section that we just created there running through. So if I switch on the base level, okay, we can still see that the creases are being transmitted, and that's because our smooth shape is set to add. So what we need to do is just right mouse click, change the combine mode of that to merge, so it's going to blend in. And now we can't see the basic moulding, and that's because we need to look at cropping our new smooth shape to the shape of our leaf and stem model. So I'm going to select the smooth underlying shape, hold down shift, I'm going to select the copy of the visible model, which is our leaf and stem part. Then I'm going to come over and use the option to clear area of selected components, and it's going to clear it outside the last item in the selection, which was the leaf and stem component. So I'm going to select that. Okay, and we can see that that's applied those changes. It's cropped it to the shape of our leaf and stem. And so if we just take a look at this and break it down a little to get a better understanding of what's happening here, I'm just going to switch off the copy of the visible model, which is the leaf and stem component. And then we can see we've got our base shape on the bottom, and then we have this underlying shape that we just created using this vector here. And then we've looked at cropping that component to the overall shape of our leaf and stem. And the level that that's sat on is set to merge. So that's merging into the base level, which is sat below that. And so because we've created that smooth shape a little bit larger than the original cross section, and we've created that smooth shape, when we switch on our leaf and stem components, it's adding on top of that underlying shape. And so we're not getting those creases coming through, as it has a basis, a nice smooth underlying basis there. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Let's just put that in C. So now we can look at creating the full length moulding. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to Edit, and I'm going to select all the vectors. And I'm going to right mouse click and say Move to Layer, New Layer, and then I'm going to rename that layer and call that layer Vectors. I'm going to make that invisible, inactive, and press OK. And then we'll go to our Layers tab, and then for layer 1 I'm just going to rename that by right mouse clicking there, say rename. I'm just going to call that Components, and that's where all of our components are sat on that layer. Okay, so we'll go back into the drawing tab. What I'd like to do now is just alter our job setup. So I'm going to go into the set job dimensions and origin, and I'm going to set our XY position to be in the lower left hand corner, and I'm going to change the width of the part to be 48, and we're going to keep the height the same at 4, and then I'm just going to up my resolution to be very high, and that's going to allow us to have more pixels to play with, and I'll press OK. So now that we've increased the width of our part to be 48 inches, we can look at creating a linear array of the components that we already have. So we know that our moulding is 12 inches wide, so we can create 4 copies in total along that 48 inch width. So I'm going to go to the Modelling tab. I'm just going to go into my base level. I'm going to select Basic Moulding, hold down Control, I'm going to select Copy of the Visible Model. That's the leaf and stem that's sat on top of our underlined shape, which I'm also going to select. Then we're going to go and create a linear array. And so in here I'm going to input some values into this form. So we want 1 row, and then we want 4 columns. And then I'm going to put in an offset of 12 in X, as we know that the width of the part is 12. And then for Y we're going to put 0, and press copy. You can see it's just thinking about that, and we can see it's created the array there. Okay, we can see we have a nice smooth transition between all of those copies as we set an offset spacing of 12 inches, which is the width of the original part. Now I like the way that that looks, but what I would like to do is look at flipping every other one, so this one and this one. I like to flip them horizontally so that we're alternating the pattern. So to do that, I'm just going to close that, I'm just going to undo what we've just done and say undo array copy, and then I'm going to go and insert a new level that's going to have this alternate arrayed copy. So I'm going to say insert new level, I'm just going to rename that level, and I'm just going to call that alternate array, and then we'll put the alternate array within this level. Now before I do that, what I'd like to do is just switch off the basic moulding and the base level, and I'd like to create a copy of the visible component. So we're going to create a baked version of the leaf and stem component that's sat on top of our smooth underlined shape. And that's purely just to minimise the amount of components that I'm going to have within this new level, as we're going to look at creating copies of those. So with those visible, let's go over to create component from visible model. And we can see it's created that there. So if I switch off our smooth shape level, you can see we've got that there, and if I press my base level, turn that on, we can see that that's adding to that. So what I need to do is look at changing the combine mode of our alternate array to merge, so it's sat nicely within that base shape. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Okay, so let's go and select the basic moulding, hold down Control, select copy of visible model, then we'll go and create that array. We'll go with the same settings that we used before, we'll press copy, and then we've got our copies there. So I'm happy with that. Let's close that down, and then I'm just going to go into the 3D view and select this component, hold down Shift, select this component here. We're going to go over to mirror selected objects, uncheck flip job about center, uncheck create mirrored copy, and then I'm going to flip that horizontally. Then we can close that, and we can see now we've got a nice mirrored pattern there. So I'm happy with that. So we can look at taking this even further by taking the component that we already have and look at distorting it to a vector. Now I'd like to create an arch shape for this component to be distorted around. So before I go and draw up any vectors, I'm just going to insert another level. So I'm just going to right mouse click and say insert new level. I'm going to rename that level and call that arch. make that the active level, and then I'm just simply going to create a copy, a component from the visible model, so we just have one complete baked part, and that way we can then access all of these individual parts if we wanted to at a later date. So I'm going to go over, create component from visible model. We can see it's created that there. So now I can minimize my base level, switch that off, minimize my alternate array, and also switch that off. We're left with a baked version of our molding. So I'm going to go back to my job setup and alter the job size. So we're going to go to set job dimensions and origin. And for this I'm going to give that a width of 40 and a height of 20. OK that. And we can see that the job size has changed there. And then I'd like to come in and draw an arc. Okay. So what I can do is I'm going to create an arc through the centre, start and end points. So I'm going to select that option there. And then we can enter start and end points as values. So for the start, I'm going to put in start x equals 6, y equals 1, and our end point is going to be x equals 34 and y equals 1. I'm going to give that a set radius of 14, and then we're going to press create and close, and we can see that we've got our arc shape there. And so this is actually the inside edge to what we'll create with our 4-inch high moulding. So meaning that the outer diameter with that 4-inch high moulding is going to be 36 inches. And what we want to do is distort this moulding around the curve of this vector. So to minimise the part being stretched, it will make sense for us to size up the part so that it's correct in length. So I'm going to select our component, we're going to come over and set the size of that part. So as I said, the outside diameter is 36 inches and the moulding is 4 inches thick, resulting with the inner diameter being 28 inches. And so that gives us a medium diameter between the inside and the outside edge of 32 inches, and this is what I'm going to use to scale the moulding. So I'm going to come in and just uncheck link XY, as I only need to alter the width of the part so that it equals to the length of my arc. And so to work out the circumference of a full circle, we do pi times the diameter. And this is where we're going to use the 32-inch diameter, that medium value between 36 and 28, the outer and the inner edge, but I only need to work out the circumference of half a circle. So I need to use the equation pi times the diameter, which is 32, divided by 2 in order for us to get the half circle. And what we can do is enter that directly in the form as a calculation. So I'm going to select all the values within that width box there, and then I'm going to press P for pi times, I'm going to use the asterisk, and then we're going to go 32, which is the diameter, and we're going to say divided by 2 to get that half circle, and then I must press equals in order for that to go through, and we can see we've got that exact value there. So I'm going to press apply, and then we can close that, and we can see that it is slightly stretched, but it still looks okay, so I'm happy with that. And so now we know that the part is the length of our arc, we can go ahead and distort that. So if that's selected, I'm going to hold down Shift, select our arc, and we're going to use the Distort Selected Objects tool. We're going to say above a single curve, which is this vector here, we can see it's got a tick there to tell us that that's okay, so we're going to apply that. We can see that that's distorted that there for us, so we can close that down, maximise the 3D view and take a look at that. And so that completes this tutorial where we've looked at lots of different ways that we can create models from our vectors. We then looked at how we can assemble the part into a full 48-inch length moulding, and then took that a stage further to create the arch shape that you can see here. So at this stage it's a good idea to go ahead and save the file. So let's go to File, Save As, we're going to call that Lily Leaf Model, save, and then you can access that from the project folder.